Hey guys, Stealth here and welcome to this video on heavy cruisers. This is going to be a long form video where we're going to discuss all the sorts of different builds that you go for with a heavy cruiser. Now, keep in mind that the term heavy cruiser kind of morphs as you're starting out from 1890 all the way to 1940. Early game, you get the turret cruiser, or the armored cruiser if you will. This is the more conventional design and this is just a Spanish oddity. The armored cruiser, as general heavy cruisers go, they are 3,500 to 8,000 tons. If you go all the way up to 1940, your heavy cruiser has morphed into a ship that is over 2.5 times as heavy at 21,500 tons. And that is without beam and draft improvements, at which point it can almost reach 25,000 tons. Now this is going to vary from nation to nation. So if you're looking at China, they also have modern heavy cruisers. These things are definitely a lot sleeker. You have the British Empire, which have their modern heavy cruisers, which go up to 19,500 tons. Every nation will have a slightly different hull, but overall they all seem to have the same capabilities when fitting weapons. It is more when you go into the earlier phases, such as with the Spanish in 1890, that you get this weird turret cruiser. Now, the overall role of a heavy cruiser can be anything you like. And that makes this thing so hard to pin down. Because you could argue that the heavy cruiser is a jack of all trades. It's a master of none. It doesn't do any one thing particularly well. It is not there to sink battleships, but it can do it. It's not there to strictly guard the fleet against smaller ships, but it can do it. It's not specifically designated as a torpedo warship, although it can be. Before we continue with today's video, first something about our sponsor, which is the Block Zone. The Block Zone has projects. These are big projects. In case you're not gaming, you might be working on one of these. This is a very familiar battleship, Iowa. Or rather, it is Missouri, Battleship 63. Now, these are 3,306 pieces that you're going to have to put together, so these can keep you occupied for a while. You also have a ton of different military vehicles. You can go for a remote-controlled even Ferdinand. There is, of course, the Panther. If you want something more modern, you got an M1A2. All of these are very sizable projects and will take you quite a while to build, and then potentially disassemble and build it again. Now with my link down below in the description or the code STEALTH upon checkout, you're going to get 10% off. So in case of the Missouri, that's another 34 bucks that you're saving. Keep in mind, you can also send these out as a gift in case you have a friend or maybe a group of friends that you want to gift this thing together with for that one particular friend who really enjoys these things. So, use the code down below in the description or add code STEALTH on checkout. A heavy cruiser is something that will fit a gap in your capabilities that something like a more specialized ship as a battleship or a lighter ship like a torpedo boat or a destroyer light cruiser cannot do. Which is basically be a mainline ship. And by a mainline ship I mean generally the majority of your ships should be heavy cruisers. Because if you kit these things out the right way, they'll be able to handle most threats for you. Now, let's take the British heavy cruiser. It's the armored cruiser. You can see that in 1890, these things all look fairly alike. You got the armored cruiser with the French. They have a bit more of a tumble home hull. When it comes to the Germans, they have the coastal defense ship, which has a dual turret layout on the bow and one on the stern. They also have a bit of an odd heavy cruiser when it comes to their more armored cruiser design. All of these things are a bit weird. Early game, I would say the heavy cruiser job is to inflict pain upon smaller targets, such as the light cruisers and the torpedo boats. Your armament will very much depend on the type of threat that you're trying to counter. If you are trying to counter something as small as a destroyer, then having a lot of smaller guns would be more beneficial over having a couple of really big guns. Now there is a case to be made for either way. Because if you put an 11-inch gun on a heavy cruiser, and you hit... It doesn't even look right, it looks a little out of place here. If you hit a light ship, say a light cruiser or a torpedo boat with this once with high explosive, it's more than likely that the thing will cease to exist, either by the sheer damage, or because with high explosive you're going for an extensive overwhelm. So the enemy is going to be facing so many fires at the same time that the ship will instantly be declared lost and the combatant is out of the fight. The reload on these things, however, is a whopping 166 seconds, and that is of course without upgrades. Now in this case, if I'm fighting smaller targets, you could make the case for the 6-inch gun, because this thing reloads in 53 seconds. But as you can see, the HE damage is also far less. Now there is another aspect that you can consider when fighting smaller ships. That is the turret rotation speed. How quickly can you move this thing around, and how quickly can you acquire a new target? In the case of the 6-inch gun, it rotates 5 degrees per second. Let's say I want to have the turret swing all the way from the port side all the way over to the starboard side. That's going to take me 30 seconds with this gun. That is, if the target happens to stay there. If you're going to be using the 11-inch gun, then your rotation speed drops to 3.57 degrees per second. So you're going to be looking at more like 40-45 seconds before your gun swings all the way around. And by that time, the target might be over there. And that is assuming that the ship maintains its direction of travel. It keeps sailing straight on. Now, if I'm building the ship out to deal with light cruisers and torpedo boats, I would probably go for something like this. I would probably go for a couple of relatively low power, small main guns and back them up with a lot of smaller guns. Now, especially in 1819, 1895, 1900, let's say 1910, don't expect to hit much unless you're at point blank range. Which means that you might have your fancy 5-inch guns, if you can even fit those. You can't on this hull. The 4-inch guns, you can definitely fit some. 3-inch and 2-inch, same deal, but the game doesn't exactly allow you a lot of freedom with most of these hulls. In this case, I think a 2-inch gun would be sufficient. Especially if you put them in tandem with a couple of, let's say, higher pen shells. Insofar as you have that capability, you'll be able to do quite a bit of damage. And these things reload pretty quick, 6.8 seconds. If you give them, let's say, better shells, and I'm thinking eventually maybe Capitalistic 1, they will be able to punch right through the armor scheme of a light cruiser. Now, let's go top to bottom. What are you looking for speed? Well, it's going to depend on the hull. Early game, armored cruiser, it says maximum optimal speed is 20.5. This means that you can do 20.5 knots fairly easily without breaking the bank, either in the sense of displacement or in the sense of actual financial money, financial resources that you have to pour into this ship. If you go over this speed limit, if you will, you're going to start paying the price. So let's say you're getting 20.5. I'm looking at 2,656 tons and about 2.8 million. If I'm going to go to 21 knots, it's okay. If I go to 21.5 knots, we're starting to see some increases here. Let's go to 24 knots, and all of a sudden my weight is completely off the scale, and you can see that the cost is prohibitively high. Because if I go... Where's the sweet point for this cruiser? The sweet spot? 21.5. Yeah. Somewhere around that 21. You can generally go 1 or 2 knots over. This is going to allow you to still have a lot of weight available for superstructure, armor, what have you. Now, in this case, I would want the ship to do about 21 knots, so that I still have a lot of displacement available, but if you're very dedicated to catching smaller ships, you'll probably want something that can do like 22 knots. Just be prepared to have a more expensive heavy cruiser fleet. One which, however, is also more capable of actually pursuing the target, simply because it is faster. Now, you might have to shift some of these turrets around in order to make room for whatever tower you want to get. If I'm hunting down smaller targets, I always want a high base accuracy, because base accuracy means that every shot has a slightly greater chance of actually hitting the target. The better this is, the more likely you are to hit a small target, even early game. As for the secondary tower, same rules apply. Go for base accuracy. It's the second line, you got aiming speed and then you got base accuracy. Don't care about long-range accuracy. Long-range accuracy is very poorly explained in the game, and even after a couple hundred hours in game, I still don't know at what range that starts, because it's just nowhere explained. Don't look at long-range accuracy, you won't hit anything anyway. Now with those towers in place, we might be able to add a few more secondary guns, because some of these towers come with some slots, and this one is no different. It also has the 2-inch 25 there. So now my ship is able to acquire targets, it's able to shoot relatively small targets such as a light cruiser or a heavy cruiser with this, and the smaller guns should take care of the destroyers and torpedo boats depending on what area you're in. Range, generally early game isn't that important. I wouldn't set it to none, because this means that you are definitely going to be pretty much homebound. You won't be able to have your fleet move away from the main line or from your main territory very far. But you can definitely influence this by having engine efficiency, and that's where the funnels come in. Now, I tend to go for engine efficiency of 100 to 150%. It's just that early game, this is very, very, very difficult, because your ship's systems are generally shit. You just don't have a lot of capability to get anywhere near this. Right now, with the engine that I have, my engine efficiency is just going to be really bad. The moment that this goes up, however, you're going to get acceleration bonuses, and you'll be able to start seeing range increases. If you remove a funnel and the engine efficiency drops, you can see that I instantly drop back to 4,500 kilometers. If you go for 2 big funnels, I'll be able to go 5,216 kilometers. It's fine. Smoke interference is a thing. Smoke interference means that your targeting is going to be bad, simply because you are fighting your own smoke. So these things puff up black smoke clouds, and that makes things very difficult to see for your front and secondary tower. So that means you might not have the accuracy that you like. And therefore, in the campaign, researching better boilers, better fuel systems, and better engines is definitely going to help with this whole problem. For a heavy cruiser, I always want my bulkheads to be maximum. Basically for every ship type I personally design, I'm going maximum bulkheads. It means that your ship is not that likely to flood, and if your ship happens to be on fire, it is less likely to consume the whole ship. Some people like to go with standard or increased, like many. I find that maximum generally makes my ships just a lot more survivable. Beam and draft, these impact how wide the ship is. You can just see it get more and more wide on screen. Early game, however, you're going to see this big bar up here that says, sorry, you cannot build a heavy cruiser over 4,000 tons. You don't have the tech, essentially. You don't have the technology to do this. So for early game, I would just merrily leave these things alone. Training, this is something that you won't have in the campaign, so don't bother with it too much. But if you're playing custom battles, the higher the training is, the more expensive your ship is, but also the more accurate your ship will be, the better it is at aiming targets, the better it is at reloading. Crew, this is an important one. Don't overlook the crew quarters, because this means how many crew members do I have. If you have a standard crew quarter such as this, you're going to have your crew members required to man every station and some spare. Your ship gets shot at, you lose crew members, and as such, you're going to be replacing those with your spares. If you have cramped crew quarters, you won't have that luxury. You'll be sailing around with the exact amount of sailors that you need, and no more. So this means that your ship, if it takes damage, is going to be running less crew members per post than you need. Your damage control will suffer, your fires will take longer to put out, your guns will take longer to reload. All of these are substantial problems. Spacious is something I pretty much never use. It just means that you have a lot of extra crew. If you have an extremely survivable ship, so if you have a ship that has a ton of armor, and that is going to take a lot of hits, like a battleship, then this would be useful, but for a heavy cruiser, not so much. Now, when it comes to propulsion, if you can upgrade these by all means, but most of these, especially 1890, you can't upgrade them at all. Rudder is an interesting one, because you can always select whether you want a balanced, semi-balanced, or unbalanced rudder. And this is going to impact how quickly your ship will turn. Now, since this thing is designed to hunt down smaller targets, you will want something that turns very, very rapidly. If you scroll down over on the right-hand side, you're going to see that in their maneuverability, it has a minimum turning circle, as well as a turning rate. So, when your ship is at maximum speed, how quickly can it turn? It can turn 2.67 degrees per second, but this is at maximum speed. And, at maximum rate. So when your rudder is full over, how quickly can you turn? If you pick an unbalanced rudder, that turning rate will go up. And because of that, your turning circle will go down. So you'll take less time to turn, and you'll take less time to get out of the way of an incoming torpedo. The problem is, while you're doing that, you're losing speed. You lose 52.3% speed in a turn. If you get a balanced rudder, you don't have as good of a turning circle, but you lose less speed. This is mostly a personal preference. I tend to go with ships that, especially when I'm hunting destroyers, can get out of the way quickly with unbalanced rudders. Now, protection. Always pick the best armor that you can. I don't particularly care about flaws that much. Flaws are things that, in the campaign, means that your ship aren't exactly built to spec. They could be too heavy, they could be too light, and that causes all sorts of issues. I generally tend to go with the highest tier armor that I have available. In this case, that's compound. Barbettes. This is the barbette, so basically the steel column that's underneath your turret that holds everything that the turret needs. It holds ammo, it holds the propellant, and it also means that you don't get blown up. Because if a shell were to hit here, it could detonate all of that stuff inside the magazine under the turret, blowing up the turret, causing a flash fire, which is where the flash fire pops the turret right off the ship. A barbette prevents that, so barbette anti-flash is something I always bring. If you can bring it, go double or triple hull, because with this you're far more protected against those small impacts from torpedoes. Bulkheads, again if you can, highest survivability. It is far better to have a ship come back and repair it than having to buy a new ship. Because in this case, it probably won't take me this long to build a new one. 10 months. Well, even now then. If this ship gets badly damaged, it could take, let's say, 4 months to fix it. Which is still preferable over having to build another 10 months of new ship. And because of that, I always make my ships as survivable as possible. I give them the maximum benefit when it comes to all the protection elements that you have. And that, in my case, will go to the detriment of armor. So I'll take more, let's say, interior parts that will ensure the protection of my ship, rather than going with something like having, 15 inches of main belt armor, or something ludicrous like that. Armament section. In this case, this ship is most likely going to be mostly high explosive, in case I face an enemy destroyer, because that's what the ship is designed to kill. But I don't want exclusively HE. This is going to mean I have 50% AP less. I do want to have some AP, so I'm going to go with increased AP. Secondary shells. I don't care if the secondaries, i.e. the 2-inch guns, are going to be very capable of penning a target, because they probably won't. If you have a small gun like the 2-inch, it just doesn't have the pen power that you want. It does, however, have the capacity to set fire to targets. And in case I'm targeting a destroyer or a light cruiser, the thing isn't going to have a lot of armor anyway, unless you got some sort of freak AI ship that has a fuck ton of armor that sometimes the AI does. I don't really care, so I'm going to keep this at max HE, or if you want to be a bit more versatile, go increased HE. Now, early game, you won't have any capacity to go with base fuse or different type of AP shells, so I'm going to ignore this for the time being. And when I'm building out a more modern heavy cruiser, I'm going to go for more detail on these. Shell sizes, light shells, reduce damage, reduce pen, but they're cheaper, they reload faster, and they're less prone to blowing you up. So in this case, higher gun base accuracy, that is interesting. This is mostly very useful when you're trying to target smaller ships. Because this means that my guns, my 2-inch guns, now fire every 4.5 seconds. As opposed to firing every 4.8 seconds. So you're shaving a little bit of time off the reload. When it comes to damage, however, and I'm looking HE damage, it's 29.6. If we go light, that drops to 23.7. So your drop in damage from HE seems to be more substantial than the drop in reload. Whether you want that is up to you. If you don't know what to do, don't do anything and just keep it on standard. If you're going for something that builds or that shoots explicitly high explosive and a lot of it, then heavy shells can help, because it means your shell damage, especially your HE shell damage and HE fire chance, so your chance of setting something ablaze, go up. And with that, the HE shells become a lot more dangerous. Now, you can tandem this with other things, such as the different type of shells, but more on that later. You can also tandem it with different types of powder and different types of bursting charge, but again, more on that later. When it comes to the last two categories that you have here, hydraulic turrets and standard reloading, if you can, upgrade these as quickly as you can. Because having 10% more DPS, so 10% less gun reload time, that is absolutely worth it. If you, again, combine that with the light shells, my turrets now reload in 4 seconds. This means I'm going to be firing a shell every 4 seconds from all of these targets as long as they can see, all of these turrets, as long as they can see the target. There's also some things that I haven't even used, that is case-made guns. Some hulls have this, and this is definitely going to boost my capability of dealing even more damage. Let's put this back to a more reasonable number. There. So now the ship is going to have 4 6-inch guns. It's going to have 12 of these. Come on, highlight them please. Here. 12 case-made guns and 14 turrets. So this thing per side has 6 casemates, 7 2-inch turrets, so that's 13 turrets per side that can engage a small ship. It's going to be a lot of firepower to deal with for a light cruiser or a destroyer. You will not want to approach this cruiser, and if you keep this cruiser closer to a battleship, that will ascertain that the battleship is not as likely to face an attack from a destroyer. That is, if the AI is bright enough to actually try that. Armor scheme, if I'm facing a light cruiser, basically the best thing that they can have is a 6-inch gun or a 7-inch, especially early game. So what you can do, if you don't know how damaging that can be, is just look it up. A 7-inch gun, let's say 2.5 kilometers out, can pen 7.4 inches of armor with AP. So you see the HE-AP penetration belt/deck. I'm looking at that second number, so 2500 meters, 1.5 inch is high explosive damage, or high explosive pen. The other one is AP pen, and the rest is deck. I don't care about the deck, because that means that the shell comes in like so, it angles into your deck, which is really unlikely, because you're fighting at such a short range. It is possible, if you really wanted to, but it is an odd ship to build, and I will not go into detail on that. Now, in this case, we're trying to protect against something that can deal about 7.5 inches of armor. If you're looking at the armor quality, right now I have plus 38%. So you take 38% of this number, and that is going to be the eventual score. So it is basically a calculation of 4. Let me pull that up. It is going to be 4 times 1.38 means I have 5.52 inches of armor, or 5.5. So if you want to know how to go back from this, how to defend against this 7-inch turret, you're basically going, okay, what do I need to counter 7.4 inches of armor? 7.4 inches of armor divided by 1.38 equates to about 5.4. So let's say 5.5 inches of armor, and that does mean you have a problem with your weight. Your ship is too heavy. How are you going to fix this? That is something that is entirely up to you. Do you want to have a more armored ship? Do you want to have a faster ship, a slower ship? Do you want to have fewer people on your ship? All of these are design decisions that basically only you can make. If you think that maybe the ship is a bit too heavily protected and I can go standard bulkheads, but I'll take this armor, then your main belt, which, by the way, you can see here as extending from all the way from the stern turret to the bow turret, so basically the whole ship is main belt, it is very well protected. If you're thinking, well, I don't quite need that much protection, I'm going to go with 4 inch. Personally, I would then once again increase my bulkheads to max. And I would want something with, like, say, a 1 inch or 0.5 inch superstructure. The superstructure is basically towers and funnels and everything in between. So the funnel on the stern, tower on the stern, funnel, tower. If these things get damaged or even destroyed, that will interfere with your ability to hit targets. So if you're not able to hit the target because your front tower is destroyed, then the ship is basically rendered useless and maybe needed to get withdrawn. It might be safer to try and make an escape, but then again, you're fighting something, a destroyer, that's faster than you are. So try and keep that in mind, as it could be a dangerous proposition. Now, if you scroll all the way down on the left-hand side of the screen, you also got a lot more options when it comes to adjusting your gun caliber and turrets. These 6-inch guns that I have here, you can turn them all the way up into 6.9-inch guns. This is going to not be very useful most of the time, but in some situations it can be useful. Sometimes you're going to have, let's say, a higher mark, which you can see on the second row of this explanation, this tooltip. So in this case, I have a Mark 1 gun. The Mark II gun is a more advanced weapon. It has better accuracy, it has better reload, it has better, well, basically everything, better damage. You want a Mark II. If you have a 7-inch Mark 1, but you have a 6-inch Mark 2, then just turning this 6-inch gun, this Mark II, into basically a 7-inch gun can be done by using this diameter. This is also a way to get the exact caliber and potentially penning power that you want. In my case, I don't strictly need that. What you can also tinker with is the length of the barrel. Now this changes a lot of different stats. In this case, for the 6-inch guns, I don't have the research yet to change the length of the barrel. In the campaign, if you start later on, you will have this. For the 2-inch guns, I do have it, although I cannot improve it that much. So a 2-inch or 2% chance or 2% increase of the length of the barrel really isn't going to do that much. I'm going to go from 16% accuracy to 16. Yeah, it basically doesn't change anything. So in the second part of the video, we're going to go into a cruiser that can hunt down battleships. And in that case, yes, you can definitely use these in order to make a ship that's far more dangerous. So this is how I would build out a heavy cruiser early game. And this is one that's specifically geared towards engaging targets such as small ships. If you put this thing up against a battleship, will it survive? It might. Will it kill the battleship off? Possibly. Because if you have enough of these things spewing their 2-inch guns and all their potential fire setting capability at the battleship, then the battleship might just be overwhelmed by enemy fire. Or by setting fires to the ship. So in that case, having, let's say, 3 or 4 of these things just trying to burn down an enemy battleship is definitely a very real possibility. And that means that this heavy cruiser that you designed to deal with the small ships, destroyers and light cruisers, can also take on bigger stuff. Such as, especially 1890, the battleship, and potentially other heavy cruisers. If you want it to be more of a jack of all trades, more versatile, I would potentially sacrifice a couple of 2-inch guns and add torpedo launchers. Torpedo launchers only weigh 23 tons, as opposed to, for example, a 2-inch case made for 6 tons. And with a torpedo launcher on either bow, stern, port, or starboard, note that port and starboard have better firing angles, you're going to have a lot more punch, and suddenly you might be able to actually sink a target, such as a battleship. So that is going to make the ship more versatile. So this is how I would build it out for early game. What about a later game ship? We just save this one, and we're going to go into 1940. This, they haven't updated this yet. Okay. Let's go with the modern heavy cruiser. This one is coming in at 20,500 tons, as opposed to what we had before, which was something far, far, far smaller at 4,000 tons. So this thing is 5 times the weight displacement, and that's without changing beam and draft. Now, this is a good time to discuss these. A higher beam makes the ship more maneuverable. Makes the ship more stable. And as you can see, it also gives you greater resistance against hits. It's a more stable shooting platform, which means that your accuracy will go up. It also has a couple of downsides, because the chance of a torpedo inflicting higher damage is 16% greater. Your operational range goes down, because you're trying to push a wider ship through the water, which means you're going to have to use more fuel in order to get that done. Can you offset this? Sure, but it's going to take a little bit of work. You're also going to be looking at... Does it change the stability yet? No, it doesn't. You're going to be looking at less water spread chance, so that's interesting, because if you get hit by a torpedo, the torpedo will do more damage, but if the torpedo impacts you, the chance to cause flooding or to spread water is less. So that's a big plus. What about reducing the beam? Can be especially useful if you want to make a cheaper ship, because I'm going from a ship that's costing me 21.6 million to 18.3. So if you're running a tight budget, or you want a faster ship, and note how my operational range increases, then this is definitely a way to do it. If you want something that slugs ships from greater range with higher stability, then I would definitely recommend a higher beam. Draft is the height of the hull. So this is going to increase how tall your ship is, and it doesn't quite translate it just yet into the ship. You can see it happening a bit. Draft means, again, stability. It also means maneuverability and resistance against hits, so the tooltip there isn't very useful. A taller, and consequently a larger hull, is less stable shooting platform, but more resistance against flooding and can carry more load. So if you want a ship that has a high operational range, then this can help. If you then tandem that with a low beam, then your operational range is already 17k without upgrading the engine once. Again, you can play around with this a lot, and you can cause all sorts of different designs. When it comes to a cruiser in 1940, a heavy cruiser, I would want it to have a substantial amount of range, so it can actually do operations away from your home area. It depends on what nation you're playing at. It depends on what type of ship you're building. It depends on what type of war you're waging, how you're going to be using these ships. In this case, I'm going to build it as a jack of all trades. So this is something that's going to be capable of dealing with destroyers. It's going to be capable of dealing with enemy cruisers. It's going to be capable of even dealing with enemy battleships. In this case, again, cadets is impacted by the campaign. Otherwise, just flip it to maximum and get a very accurate ship. Crew quarters, standard. Now then, propulsion. What do you want with this ship? Generally, in Dreadnoughts, if you have a ship that is stationary, it is going to take a lot more damage, because it's a far easier target to hit. So what I want to do is make sure that this ship has the best chance of either not having its engines damaged at all, or to make sure that those engines become operational very quickly. Standard, you get the turbines. Steam turbines, we got 35% buff, if you will, minus 35% engine damage chance. So the chance of my engines are getting damaged is 35% reduced, as opposed to the steam basic engine. If you go, for example, to diesels, that goes to minus 85%. This is diesel 2. This will also make your ship more expensive by 10 million. And at the same time, it will reduce the weight. Because in order to still get your speed of 27.6 knots, which I want to upgrade actually to 30, or what's the recommended? 32.5. Well, I'm going to stick to 30, it's fine. I can add more armor. If you go for diesels, it's going to reduce that engine damage chance. It's also going to improve ship repairs for engines by 175%. So your capability of fixing your engines goes up a lot, which is very, very useful. Your engine vibrations also go up, and this means that your engines are going to be vibrating the hull, so the hull kind of bumps up and down, if you will, because of the engines, and that's going to mess with your accuracy. If you want a really stable ship, you're going to have to go with something that has as little engine vibrations as possible. In this case, the gas turbines, minus 40% engine vibrations. That is really nice. Minus 35% engine damage chance, though. Also, the engine cost per weight goes up by 30,000%. So gas turbines, they have a lot of benefits, but they're really expensive. It's 60 million. As opposed, sorry, they're not that bad. I was thinking turbo electric drive. That's crazy expensive. Turbo electric drive is a different type of propulsion. You get minus 60% engine damage chance. You get a lot of green stats. Your acceleration is 200% better. Your deceleration is really good. Your turning rate's really good. Even your turrets turn faster. But the price is pretty substantial at 92 million as opposed to 60 million. Anyway, in this case, I want to go with something that's fairly middle ground, very reliable. I want to go with diesel engines. Diesel 2s, if you can get them, because these are generally the best. Great horsepower, good fuel consumption, and just pick diesel 2 if you can. Oil, generally pick the most advanced stuff because it's going to give you more fuel efficiency, which means a better range, and also less smoke interference. So we're going to go up to 17,886 kilometers. Auxiliary engines, this is basically something I didn't cover because we didn't have any back in 1890. These boost the ship's stats, or at least some of them. You can go all the way from AUX 1 to AUX 5. AUX 1 is basically an extra petrol engine to keep the ship operational when the main engine is down. All the way up to having a diesel-electric auxiliary system, which will very much help your ship with water pumping, turret rotation, repairing the ship, engine efficiency, but it's expensive. It's going to make your engine cost go up by 450%. So if I were to pick this one, I'm getting some improvements. It's going to cost me about 2.5 million. If I go up to AUX 5, it's going to cost me 29 million. So again, depending on the type of budget that you have, I do like to go for a higher auxiliary engine because it means my ship has a greater chance of getting repaired and thus making it through the battle. Thus, I don't have to spend now no longer 10 months but currently 8 months because shipbuilding improvements. But still, it's going to be more expensive as you do this. If you don't know what to do, middle ground or an auxiliary diesel engine. Something that's not too bad for your budget, something that's too heavy for your ship. Yet, that will still help you. You now also get shaft propulsion. Propeller shafts 1 through 5. Again, you get different stats, and again, you get different bonuses. In this case, your engine repair goes up. You get a little bit of acceleration, your turning rate and maximum speed penalty goes down. In this case, your ship repairs goes up. Turning rate goes up, acceleration up, and speed penalty goes up. But also, the budget and the weight. So again, if you want to build a crazy expensive ship, you can, but it will cost you a lot of money. As for the semi-balanced or unbalanced rudder, in this case I'm going to go with a balanced rudder, because I will now have access all the way down here to sonar. That's going to warn me of incoming torpedoes. And there are other ways of spotting those as well. And with the balanced rudder, I don't lose as much speed in a turn. I only lose 5%. So my ship will be doing 30 knots most of the time. And the higher this speed is, the more likely you are to not get hit. Because a ship that's moving really fast is a ship that is difficult to predict where it's going to go next. And in this game that translates to having less accuracy. Other stats, steering is now available. We can have all the way from steam steering gear or electro-hydraulic steering gear. Now, this is not simply from this is bad to this is best, because electric 2 gives you some slightly different stats. It gives you better rudder shift and better turning rate as opposed to here. You're looking at 11.5 and 18.5 or 15.5 to 22.5. So arguably this is better when it comes to the buffs. But you have some substantial debuffs. You have less water pumping, less turret reverse, less ship repairs. So in this case, you don't have as many debuffs, you don't have as many buffs, but I would argue that electro-hydraulic steering gear 2 is better. Okay, armor. As discussed, I tend to go for the best armor quality that I can. It means that my armor is going to be lighter, it's going to be heavier, it's going to be lighter, it's going to be more expensive, and it will be stronger. So I can armor the ship with the, let's say, the same level without having it weigh the ship down as much. Anti-torpedo protection, I would go with an anti-torp 3 or 2. It basically becomes very costly displacement-wise in order to install an anti-torp 5, and you generally won't need it. This negates 60% of a torpedo damage, and the chance that the ship will start flooding is reduced by 50%. But it's also going to cut into your displacement quite a lot. This is one of the things that I tend to go 2 or 3. Hull bottom, again, is going to make the ship more resistant to torpedoes. It's going to make the ship less likely to flood. Pick middle ground here, go for a double bottom. And then bulkheads, always reinforce 2. Why? Flash fires and fire extinguishing. Flash fires, if you remember, is that thing where your ships get hit. The turret gets hit badly and the turret starts flying off the ship. You generally don't want that. This makes sure that it is less likely to happen. And it also means that you're that you are far better at fighting fires. So fire extinguishing goes up, and even the chance of fire goes down. We also get access to anti-flood systems. How likely are your guys to salvage the ship if the ship starts taking on water? Which generally in combat at some point you will. You get hit, you might get penned, so the shell starts going right through the ship. You start taking on water, you want to get that water back out of the ship. If you can, go for the highest anti-flooding tier. Will it make your ship more expensive? Hell yes. Is it going to be more likely to survive the battle? Absolutely. So go with anti-flood 3. Citadel. This is where it gets really interesting. You can basically ignore Advanced Armored Citadel, it's not that useful. You get Turtleback Armor Scheme or Citadel 5, which is the all or nothing armor scheme. Now, if you're looking at this picture here, you're going to see a bit of difference depending on how you armor the ship up, but it isn't explained very well. The Turtleback Armor Scheme, as the tooltip says, extra layers of sloped armor behind the main belt and above the citadel. So behind the main belt is basically everywhere where you don't have turrets. So where the area isn't dark gray. If that is dark gray, I'm colorblind, so I can't exactly see it. It's all gray for me. This one means that the ship is less likely to start taking hits that come in, let's say, more horizontally. It's basically what this does. So if you have a ship that's going to be shorter ranged, then the turtleback armor might be very useful because your shells come in, let's say, like this, and they bounce off your armor. They come in like this, they bounce off. Even if the ship starts taking shells from here, they have a chance, because of those extra plates, to start taking the shells and deflect them. The all or nothing scheme is far more efficient, especially against plunging fire. Now, plunging fire is shells that come in almost vertically, and instead of hitting the side of the ship, they basically plow right through the deck. And your deck armor is generally going to be a lot less than your belt armor. So in this case, you're banking on a ship that is more likely to be fighting at greater range. It will protect the most vital parts of the ship, but the other parts of the ship, such as the bow and stern, are not as heavily protected. I generally go for an all or nothing armor scheme because it generally works best for me. If you want more of a brawler ship, then Turtleback is an option. And it does give you some bonuses over the all or nothing scheme. It's not necessarily 5 is better than 4. It's just a different way of looking at armoring a ship up. Because over here you see that resistance is up by 15% and armor strength is up by 22%. You don't get that with Citadel 5. You get 17.5% armor strength and 7.5% resistance. So this means you're going to be less resistant, your armor strength is not as good, it's just that your ammo detonation chance is down and your chance of engine damage is down. It's -20, -30 versus -55 and -60. So it's a different way of thinking about how to take your ship and armor it up. If you want to get the highest armor quality, you're going to need Citadel 4. If you want the, let's say, the lightest armor... Oh, not even, actually. Yeah, it's because it adds more Citadel armor. This is a category I will get into right now. It depends what Citadel armor you have, depending on the Citadel. When you had Citadel 1, or not even a Citadel, in the 1890s, then you don't even get this whole armor. It's not a factor. If you get Citadel 4, it gives you an inner deck and a second inner deck. So let's say the ship gets hit from one of those plunging fire shells. They go through the first layer of deck armor, 3.7 inches. That slows that shell down. The second layer it encounters is the first inner deck, which is another inch, and it slows down even further. The shell still keeps going, and that's when it hits the second inner deck layer. The same works for the belt. So 2.2 inches of inner, and then another 1.2 inches of inner. Don't add these up, because it means that at least 75% of the shell's penetrating power is lost before hitting this layer. So let's say you're getting a, I don't know, you're getting hit by an 11-inch shell from 17,000 kilometers out. Sorry, 17 kilometers. It's going to have currently 5.8 inches of pen through a deck, as seen in that row of 17.5 thousand meters. That means that it's going to pen potentially your deck, although with this armor quality bonus it won't. Let's say it does, it's going to go through this, it's then going to encounter this, and it's then going to encounter that. And at this point, 75% of the shell's penetrating power is lost, so the shell will really not do that much damage. If you go for the Citadel 5, you get 3 of these layers. So it's layer upon layer upon layer upon further outer layer. And this makes the ship extremely resistant to damage, but also means that you just have more armor and thus more weight on your ship. If you don't think you need as much, by all means, go turtleback. If you think, well, I'm going to need every bit of armor I can get, then definitely go for Citadel 5. Now, before I go to equipment and armament, we're going to have to do some building of the ship. I tend to go with the most advanced tower available, because I like having base accuracy, base aiming speed. All of these things really, really help. They can make your ship more expensive than they need to be. This is 3.6 million, this is 3 million. It's also 300 tons, give or change a few. Is it worth it? I would say yes. It's 17.5 base accuracy versus 15. Basically, I just picked the most advanced thing. Is that necessarily the best? Perhaps. Now, when you're building out your armament, some hulls, such as the German towers, they kind of restrict the hulls in what you can build where. And this can be a bit frustrating because it means that you're going to have basically to work with the doctrine of that particular nation. You cannot have several quad turrets, if you will, on the bow, like you would with a Nelson or one of the French battleship designs on a German ship. It just doesn't work, because you don't have the barbettes, you don't have the turret placement. Let's say that I want this thing to be able to engage most different threats. I want it to be able to do some damage against battleships, using high explosive, and I want it to be able to deal a lot of damage against cruisers, and potentially even destroyers. Why am I saying potentially even destroyers? Well, I'm already thinking of the type of shell that this thing will fire. 9-inch are generally very versatile. They reload in 17 seconds. Remember how that 6-inch used to reload? Or sorry, that 11-inch used to no, what do we have? Yeah, an 11-inch, I think, on the 1890 ship. It used to reload in 166 seconds, which is just shy of 3 minutes. At this point, tech has advanced so much that you can reload a triple barrel turret, note the Mark V, in 30 seconds if you have 11-inch. A 9-inch will reload in 17 seconds, and again, this can definitely be impacted by the caliber, but also the barrel length. Let's say I want to have an ABX or ABC turret format, as the Germans put it. This gives me 9 barrels, and these 9 barrels will all be able to fire at targets as long as we're broadside on. So if there's a target, let's say anywhere of these buildings, I should be able to hit them. Same for the other side. If a target is bow on, so it's right in front of me, I can use the A and the B turret in order to deal damage to that target. For the stern, I only get 1. Can you put an additional turret on? No, not really, not on this hull. You could, if you so desire, sacrifice 1 turret from the bow and push the whole design in reverse. Why would you want to do that? Well, if you have a ship that you know is going to get overwhelmed, because it might be a raider, so it's going to push into encounters where it is basically outnumbered, it's going to be running away, then this can work. It's it's a bit of an odd design, but it can work. Because you're going to be running away, you're going to be firing your stern turrets both, as opposed to having to force to go bow in, or broadside, which means you can fire all your turrets. Now, jack of all trades, I'm going to make this thing as, let's say, versatile as I can. Let's go back to Barbette armor. I want to have Barbette 3 or 4 to reduce flash fire chance. And I now also get all the equipment. So let's first go into the equipment. What type of rangefinder would you like? There are basically 2 different choices. You got Coincidence 5 and Stereo 5. What's the difference? This one is more aimed, no pun intended, at quickly swapping targets. It is heavier, it's more expensive than a stereoscopic rangefinder. So switching from one target to another can take far less time. 110% gun aiming speed. Gun base accuracy, another 15%. Gun base accuracy, very useful if I want to start hitting something as small as a destroyer. So in this sense, this probably benefits me most. If you're building out a heavy cruiser that's more geared towards longer range warfare, I would go stereoscopic, because that gives you better long range accuracy. It also means less gun aiming speed as compared to the Coincidence, so your gun aiming speed is not going to be as good. But if you're firing with either one ship or more, then you'll have gun splashes or shell splashes. So you won't hit the target, but the shells splash around your battleship target, for example. This means that your gunners are going to have to figure out, wait, was that my splash or yours? How am I going to have to adjust my ship or my shot for that? With the Coincidence, they don't know that. With the stereoscopic rangefinder, they do. So your interference from your own guns and from other guns is less. In my case, I might want to be shooting a destroyer one moment and a battleship the next. I'm going to go with the Coincidence rangefinder 5. Acoustics. Acoustics allows you to detect torpedoes, and in the campaign also deal with submarines as well as mines. Sorry, with submarines. They don't do anything against mines. Sonar 3, definitely the best, also the most expensive. It's going to cost you 10 million for a full Sonar 3 kit. It's also going to make the ship heavier, which it's not that bad, it's about 500 tons, but you might not have that. Radio. This is going to allow a communications range bonus, either 150% or 300%. It will also allow slight gun aiming speed, better reconnaissance, and flagship communication bonus. Now, what are all those? Comms range means that a ship is going to be communicating with others. And if you have a heavy cruiser as your flagship, as long as ships are inside the range of this ship, they will get a bonus to accuracy. That's what communications do. Reconnaissance allows you... where is it? Here. Allows you to detect other ships without being detected, ideally. So being able to get your recon stat up, very much appreciated, and radar definitely helps. 200% reconnaissance bonus. You can make the case that if you have just a bunch of heavy cruisers together that are going to be escorting a battleship, you don't need this. And that does save you some weight, although it's not that much. It also saves you 4 million, which is also not that much. In this case, I would generally bring RDF. If you don't have access to radar yet, definitely bring RDF. Because if you're in battle, it's going to give you a sort of little arrow that says, hey, that's where I'm picking up some ship. So that's the distance, or that's the direction that you need to travel in order to intercept it. Radar. Generations 1, 2, and 3. Generation 3, very advanced, very good for switching your gun. So gun aiming speed, another 180% bonus. Nighttime battles, they're a thing, but you won't be able to tell in the current version of Dreadnoughts, which is 1.2.5 Live RX3. And eventually, supposedly, they're going to change the way that the battles actually look. So if the battles, or if the ship says, or if the game says, hey, you're in a storm, then you're actually going to look like you're in a storm. If you're fighting at night, this will actually make it look like you're fighting at night. Anyway, this is very expensive. It costs you 29 million to get a radar. If you are in a very fortunate financial position, by all means go for this, because especially as 600 tons for a load of bonuses that make this thing really accurate. At the same time, it's very expensive. If you're strapped for cash, just go for Generation 1, and if you're finding that if you're in a campaign and you want to refit the ship later, you can. Depth charges, only useful for campaign when you're dealing with enemies that use submarines. They basically give you a damage bonus to submarines. If you're doing a custom battle, don't care about these. If you're dealing in a campaign, I would recommend that you bring them. They're really cheap. I mean, they don't even move the needle by a million. And they move this by about 180,000. Sorry, 180 tons. Not even, 150 tons, that's it. Sold, depth charges. Okay. Now then, further armament. This ship, with her 9-inch guns, is going to be able to engage everything that I want it to. So I'm going to give her a standard ratio of AP-HE. I want to make sure that she has a standard ratio of AP shells and a bunch of HE shells. If you're going standard, this means that of this particular turret, it's going to have 420 shells. That means 210 are going to be HE, 210 are going to be AP. Gives me the best opportunity to switch to the best shell for the particular target that I'm engaging. Secondaries? Well, I don't have those yet, so let's set those up. These things fire fairly quickly, every 17.3 seconds right now. In case I find something smaller, like a destroyer, I would want those to get engaged by other guns. You could use 4-inch... oh, funnels. It's also I haven't set up yet. 5-inch guns on this hull sadly don't fit in these little outcroppings. So that's why I immediately switched to 4-inch, kind of instinctively. You can put a 5-inch here. So that would give you additional firepower. And whether you go for dual barrel or triple barrel is entirely your choice. Dual barrel tends to be slightly more accurate. Triple barrel kind of brute forces his way through that by just outputting more shells. Generally, I like to have a lot of the same type of guns because it means my shells are going to be distributed well among the ship. Basically, if one of these turrets gets blown off, that doesn't mean I immediately lose all 4-inch. I'm going to still have more. And on the little plateaus here, the balconies, you can have 3-inchers or smaller. So let's say I want to have 3, 3, 3, 3. Now with these armaments, I'm going to be able to engage destroyers, light cruisers, and if you put a lot of emphasis on pen, so if you pack really high-end AP shells, you'll pen battleships. It is not unusual to be able to do that. It is weird that you can do that, but it is not unusual. So, what do I want with these secondaries? Well, if I'm facing a battleship, I'll probably have to close to some shorter distances. If I'm hunting down destroyers and light cruisers, I'm also going to have to close to some slower or lower distances because the enemy is simply fast and small and I won't hit them from far. So these guns are going to be very good when dealing with targets such as cruisers, battle cruisers, and battleships. These are going to be good for light cruisers and destroyers, and they'll be mostly firing HE anyway, so I'm probably going to stick them to max HE. Time to pick the HE shell. We now have a wide buffet of HE shell types. You got incendiary on the one hand side. This focuses on setting as many fires as possible, but they do absolutely no pen. So a shell essentially works by blowing a hole in the enemy ship and then exploding the shell inside of it. This one doesn't, because it loses 95% of its shell pen when you're firing HE. The alternative, and everything in between, has slightly more favorable stats to increase shell pen. So right now, my shell pen at 1,000 or yeah, let's say 1,000 meters is 1.6 inches with high explosive. Right now it is 0.1. So it goes up by a substantial margin, but I'm sacrificing my ability to set fires. My fire chance goes down by 15%. Nose fuse, base fuse, things like these, they're somewhere in the middle. These things give you less shell pen, but more HE damage and more fire chance. And considering that I'm firing at ships like a destroyer or a light cruiser, which are not that heavily armored, these things should be enough. Because with a nose-fuse shell, I can start dealing damage beyond the armor, so the HE damage should do, or the HE shell should explode inside the ship. However, these HE shells also impact the main guns. So with these things, I'll be able to, let's say, a 10,000 meter range, which is more, let's say more normal for a 9-inch gun. I'll be able to pen 10,000 meters 1 inch. That's not that much. But when I do pen it, and that could be a superstructure, for example, I'll be able to do quite a bit of damage. 511. Alternatively, if I want to have capped ballistic on the main guns, that's going to give me a lot of pen. 3 inches. But less HE damage. It used to be possible, in fact it used to be fairly easy, to go with incendiary shells on absolutely everything and just burn everything out of your way. And I mentioned this before when I said that ships that fire high explosive incendiaries, and they fire a lot of it, that is possible to overwhelm the enemy damage control parties. So the enemy ship is going to be taking so many fires at the same time that the damage control teams on the enemy ships go, okay, I don't know what to do with this, and they kind of surrender. And the ship is lost because the whole thing is on fire. That is an option with incendiary, but it doesn't work as well as it used to. This thing basically explodes also on impact, minus 100% shell fuse time. This one waits a bit until it has penned a bit more and then explodes. So, if I'm going with something that's capable of dealing with most different targets, probably high cap or incendiary. Especially for the secondaries, I want them to have at least a little bit of pen, and with this, they have that. Upwards and onwards, AP shells. It's basically the same deal here. Do you want to have shells that don't pen as much? Or do you want to have shells that can pen absolutely everything? Because these things can pen pretty much everything, depending on your range. If I'm looking at 10,000 meter range, these can pen 14.4 inches of armor. Yet, that is not the whole story. And this I should have also said with the HE shells. Because with the bursting charge and the propellant, you can still impact this. All of these have buffs and debuffs. I recommend you go through these in your own time. Just hover over them, read what they do, look at their stats, because it's a lot of information. I tend to go for the highest tier, so let's say the latest thing, which is triple base. Modern triple base, in fact. It means my guns have more range, slightly more pen, slightly more damage, and the chance of blowing me up is less. So that's very welcome. If you want to have even less chance of that, you can go with 2 powder. It's going to give you less gun range. Huh, that's not good. But it will give you more shell pen, and minus 45% chance of blowing up. But it doesn't work that well with my plan of setting things on fire. Because your HE shell fire chance goes down by 50%. That's a bit of a problem. Sadly, the game doesn't show you what the HE fire chance is. And I believe that it is because it doesn't know. It doesn't know what you're targeting. It doesn't know the type of armor that you're going to be facing. So it cannot predict how likely you are to set fire to a ship. This is not World of Warships. So in this case, I would just go triple base. But then again, that changes the amount of pen that I'm going to have. The same can be said for the bursting charge. This is more shell pen, but I'm always looking to reduce my flash fire chance. You got TNT 2, TNT 3, TNT 4, TNT 4 generally best. Picric acid if you want to have something burn to the ground. More shell damage for HE and more shell fire chance for HE. So again, if you're going for an HE build, Picric acid, go for incendiary, and go for something that has the highest chance of setting fires. Not 2 powder. Cordite doesn't work that well. I think triple base is best for that respect. If you're building something that has the most pen, you could go capped ballistic. That is soft shell pointed ballistic capped, which means that even your HE shells are going to deal a lot of damage if they pen. Anyway, we had this on high cap. These things, at 10,000 meter range, I can now pen 14.5 inches of armor. Might not be enough to pen the main belt of a ship, but if I'm fighting an enemy battleship and I pen their superstructure, their tower, and I blow that up, then the ship is, well, it's not mission killed. It can still shoot. It just cannot do that as accurately. So in that regard, you can definitely do quite a bit of damage with these shells. And if you close in, if you go to 5,000 meter range against the battleship, that battleship now has a chance to blow you out of the water, basically in 2 salvos. But you can also pen 20 inches of armor. That is a lot of damage. That's a lot of pen power. So even a couple of heavy cruisers with this type of shell will be able to deal damage against a battleship and sink it. The alternative side is the SAP or semi-armor piercing shell. The more that you have a shell with high pen, it is reliant on getting a flat hit on the target. So like this. If my shell comes in straight on, that'd be perfect. But situations on the battlefield are rarely perfect, and you might have a ship that is looking at you like this. If my shell comes in from here, I don't have a flat target to dig into, which is what the capped ballistic 2 shells do best. The semi-armor piercing shells don't care as much about that. They have far less ricochet chance. So you're not as likely to actually bounce off the target. You'll dig in a little bit, but you don't have as much pen. So whereas with these things at 15,000 meter range, or let's say 10,000 meter range, I have 14.5 inches of armor pen. I don't have that with these. I have 5.9. If I'm facing, or if I'm building this thing as a ship that can deal with basically anything, I'll probably go with standard shells or capped. Because this is going to give me more potential power against a battleship, while not sacrificing that much of my ricochet angle. When it comes to shell size, mostly up to you. Light shells, again, very useful for dealing with smaller targets, as well as in tandem with semi-armor piercing, lower chance to ricochet, but also lower damage, and generally less pen. Super heavy shells, really big shells, take a long time to load, take a long time to actually deal damage, but when they deal damage, they tend to be more devastating. Compare AP damage, 165, AP pen, 10,000 meters, 12.8. Super heavy shells, AP pen, 14.7, AP damage, 208. So your AP definitely goes up. Now, don't look too hardly or too strictly at the numbers such as AP damage, because it doesn't actually work that way. I have seen HE shells that told me, hey, I can do 500 damage, and they did 15,000. It just doesn't make any sense. These numbers aren't really that important. You're mostly looking at pen. How much can I actually penetrate with my shell? What I haven't touched on is how many shells do you bring. This is going to give you more shells at the expense of a slightly greater chance of blowing yourself up. This is the alternative. Less shells, less chance to blow up. I would pick reduced only if I went with something that spews HE, because that generally has far more volatile ammunition and propellant with a higher chance of blowing yourself up. Generally, I go for a standard or even an increased loadout to make sure that I never run out of shells in the middle of a battle, because that is generally not a great situation to be in. As for turret rotation, upgrade this if you can, because the faster my turrets rotate, the better it is. They now rotate at 6 degrees per second, so I can, in about 25 to 30 seconds, change my turrets from all the way over there to all the way over here, which means I can very quickly acquire a different target. Reload as best as you can get, because my reload now is 17.9 seconds, and now it is 12.3. Really good turret, really good loading speed. Now, before we get into armor, first let's add a funnel to ensure that this thing actually has some workable numbers. Look at that engine efficiency. Really nice. Let's go into gun caliber. You don't have any casemates anymore. They don't exist in 1940. But you do have stats such as the length and diameter of the turrets. I already explained diameter. There is a little trick when it comes to 4-inch guns, I believe. Yeah. The 4-inch guns cannot be armored on the side. So basically anything, and the side also means front, by the way. So if you're looking at a 4-inch gun like this, this is also considered a side of the turret. Don't ask me why. I cannot armor them up. Anything hits them, they die. If you go to a 4.2, I can suddenly armor up this turret, which means that they're more survivable. So in this case, actually upscaling your turret, even just a little, can help with the survivability of that turret. Does this work exponentially? Not strictly, but if I go from 4.4 to 4.5, I can suddenly add more armor. 4.8 and I can add even more. But now my guns have grown to be too big. They don't fit on the turret slot anymore. So I'm going to be reducing that back to, let's say 4. Wow, that's fucking exploity. I just noticed this. You can put this, let's say 4.9. You can armor these up as much as you want and then push this back, and the gun forgets that these 4-inch guns cannot have armor. My god. Okay, so that's an exploit. Use it as you see fit. Same works for the 3-inch guns to some extent, but it doesn't work as well. You can add top armor to them, but not side armor. More interesting is barrel length. Now the barrel length very much impacts how much accuracy and how much pen you have on a barrel, so on a shell, but also how long your reload's going to be. Please take note of the reload, 12.3 seconds. You can make these at best 20% longer. I now have a reload of 18.9 seconds. That's substantial. If I'm looking at 10,000 meter range, I have 6.8 to 10% accuracy. If I'm taking these back off, I now have 4.1 to 6.4% accuracy. So my accuracy has dropped substantially. What has also been moving around is my pen. 10,000 meter range, 13.3. 10,000 meter range, 16.1. So with longer barrels, the shell basically gets more power as it goes out the barrel, and that means more pen. But less time, or more time to reload. Which, for a general ship, isn't that good. So you could just keep this at 0, and this way make sure that the ship has all their standard stats. You can also go the other way. I generally don't do this. Because it cuts the range of your weapons substantially. If I have standard barrel length, my range on AP shells is 23, and my range on HE is 20. If I cut these things off, I'm going from 20 kilometers to 12, and 23 to 14 for AP shells. On top of that, your accuracy is a disaster. It is just really bad, because the game doesn't even give you stats anymore beyond 10,000 meter range or beyond 12.5, because you won't hit anything. On top of that, your shells are really slow. Now this can be an advantage. It can be an advantage. Because if your shell is slow, it's going to have... Whoops. It's going to have more of an arc. So you might be able to do deck pens with these. That works a little weird. What? Oh, I forgot my funnel again. There. The whole undo situation doesn't work. These short barrels, I generally don't use them. For secondary guns, it is definitely useful to have something like this, because it allows you to have greater range on your secondaries. It also means your reload will go up. So I might go with 10% longer barrels, and maybe 20% for the 3-inchers. What does this mean? My 3-incher can fire out to, on paper, 16 kilometers. That's substantial. These things out to 16.9. And overall stats on these guns are going to be pretty good when it comes to accuracy. Now, armoring the ship up, final part. I have a lot of displacement available for armor. A lot. And this is where you can get pretty silly with heavy cruisers. Because you can make them really heavily armored. You can go up to a 15-inch main belt. Is that a lot? Well, 15 times, and now it's not 1.63, now it is 2.63, means I have effectively 39.45 inches of armor. That is a lot. So you can make these things extremely heavily armored. Does this work? Yeah, pretty much. Because you now have a tank of a cruiser, like an absolute beast of a cruiser, and it is going to survive pretty much anything that you throw at it. It also makes the ship almost cost 300 million. Going with something more reasonable, like 8 inches all over the place, or 8, 4, 4, let's say 6, means 234 million. So it's far cheaper and you still have some displacement available. If you want to make this more of a threat to bigger ships, you can also add torpedo launchers on the stern, which is the last part, and it's what I wanted to do to fix the offset of the ship. Because I had a slight stern offset, and now that is not, well, mostly fixed. It's just that the stern's a bit heavier. Let's say 5 inches of fore belts, or maybe, I don't know, 6.5 on the foredeck, 6.2, there we go. These torpedo launchers could deal a substantial amount of damage, especially if you put them all up in the 24-inch range. These things will do a lot of damage. Of course, they are competing against the anti-torp and double hull bottom of the enemy ship, so keep that in mind. Now, the farther you put these back, the better their launch angle will be. So if I put them, like, if I put one launcher here, that gives me a pretty good firing arc, almost firing forward. If you put 2 of them, because we have some room, we have some displacement available, I can now engage targets on 2 different sides, and I can pepper them with a 24-inch torpedo. Reload, almost 900 seconds. That's almost 15 minutes of real-life time. As for propellant, standards don't get a bonus. Fast gets more torpedo speed, but also more detection. Electric, less detection, more accurate. Also more dot chance, so the chance that it bounces off the hull without actually exploding. And oxygens get you a crazy range, 23 kilometers. They're more easily detected. Not as much as an electric, but, well, easier. Torpedo dot chance goes down. Torpedo reload increases, because these are more complex. What type of propellant you want will depend on the range that you put them at. I would probably go for electrics or oxygen, because it means that my target has less time to respond. And with electric, I can still target something out to 14 kilometers. Make sure you target something big. Battleships, battle cruisers, heavy cruisers if you must. Don't target a destroyer. That's a waste, and that means that the torpedo launcher will most likely fire a salvo at a target that's going to be somewhere completely different by the time that you actually get the torpedo to reach the target. All the more since these things have a range, especially when oxygen, of 23 kilometers. So a lot can happen in the time that it takes this torpedo to 12 or 23 kilometers. So this is generally how I would build out a jack-of-all-trades heavy cruiser. Now, this has turned into a long video because you can talk a lot about big ships such as the heavy cruiser. If you have any questions, post them down below. If you have any suggestions or any additions, by all means, post those down below in a comment as well. And for now, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you soon for more videos.